Hello and welcome along to Emirates Old Trafford for another edition of Beyond the Boundary. I'm delighted to say that this morning, because it's wet and windy outside, we've got Peter Moores alongside me in the studio. Peter, of course, who was head coach here at Old Trafford about 12 years ago now, 13 years ago, and had two stints with England, and now, of course, has been at Nottinghamshire for the past 4 or 5 seasons. Peter, it's great to see you. I hope it's always nice to come back to Emirates Old Trafford, even though you're obviously in charge of the opposition team.
It's always great. It always feels a bit like home in some ways, because I'm from Macclesfield, which isn't far away anyway. It was a team I followed as a kid. That great semi-final in the dark and all that was as I was coming through as a youngster.
You remember that, do you?
I remember that, I do. But that was always the time, you know, Frank Hayes was a bit of a hero, Farouk engineer. That era was what I was brought up on. So when I got the job here, 2009, I think, or whatever it was, that always felt a bit like completing a circle in some way. So it always felt a bit like coming home. And actually, it's a great club. Always has been a great club and always will be a great club. Interesting
you mentioned Frank Hayes as being one of your early heroes, stroke, possibly influences. He was a hugely dynamic player, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, I just remember him playing for England, especially. Got blonde hair, this bloke that came in, and he played and then didn't play. It was like one of those guys did well in that era where you could sort of do well and still not play because somebody else came back in. But yeah, he sort of epitomised what you wanted to be as a youngster, really. Free-flowing batter, sort of walked out there and just played, and that's what everybody wanted to do as a kid.
You mentioned you're from Macclesfield, but you ended up playing at Sussex, basically. How did that happen? How did you end up at the other end of the country?
Yeah, I sort of migrated down. Started at King's Mac is where I went to. It was grammar school, great school. I had a great time there, and sort of then through that got. I was coming down to Lancs for as a sort of 17, 18-year-old. Jackie Bond was actually taking the coaching, but the sort of keeping berth was full. Maynard Fish, I think it was Maynard.
Chris Maynard,
Chris Maynard was the keeper. Graham Fowler was still around then, also as a second keeper if needed, obviously a batter. And then I got a chance to go on the MCC ground staff, so I went there and literally was there for 2 months, signed for Worcester. And did 2 years at Worcester, and then it didn't work out, and they signed Steve Rhodes. And Steve was a great cricketer.
Yeah.
I thought I'd done pretty well, but the reality of what it was a job then, because suddenly I didn't get offered a contract, and then ended up at Sussex with a bit of a lifeline. I got injured in my first season, the only injury I've really got, and all those things sort of came together that when I actually got a chance to play, probably properly over a year and a half later, I was a better player, even though I hadn't played, because I appreciated the game more. I just went for it, and then got a career at Sussex, played in the first team for 10, 11 years, and then got the chance to coach, and then moved into coaching.
You had a significant career, as you say, at Sussex, keeping and batting. Was it always a thought in your mind that you wanted to stay in the game and you wanted to develop as a coach?
Well, coaching started for me. I did an ECB. It wasn't this like level 1, 2, 3, 4 now, isn't it? It was proficiency award or something like that. Was this first thing you did?
Teaching cricket.
Yeah. And I was going abroad to coach, and really it landed for me. I coached in South Africa, and they basically got there. You know, sometimes you're captain, coach, everything really. And we had a couple of first class lads who played in that team, and I started working with them, and they quite enjoyed it. We did quite well as a team, and it sort of I got the bug a bit. And in the winters then as a player at Sussex, we had a thing called School of Excellence, no academies then. Chris Waller ran it, who was a left arm spinner, who then was a second team coach. And I coached on that. And as I was coaching, so one of my first people I was coaching, Matt Pryor, I coached Matt Pryor at 12. And I'd started off this keeping class on a Friday night, of which we had people like Matt was on it, a guy called Nicky Wilton who went on and played England 19s. So that really, as I was playing for the last probably 7 or 8 years as a player, I was coaching in the winters.
So we're only talking probably 25 years ago, aren't we? Back end of the 90s.
Yeah.
And you've already mentioned that you went on, you did this initial course. Coaching then only a quarter of a century ago, was very much regimented, wasn't it?
Yeah.
When did you realise that you could stamp your own personality on coaching, or did that come over a period of time?
I think it comes over time. You make loads of cock-ups to start. There's no doubt about that, because you don't really know what you're doing. I've always had an enthusiasm for the game. I love the game, which I found as a kid. When I found the game, a guy called Ian Wilson was at King's School as a teacher, and he lit a spark, and I got a chance to play, and I loved it. I just loved talking about it, loved trying to do it. So when I came into coaching, I wanted to try and help people get better, but you get it wrong to start with, because you push too hard, you're trying too hard to, and then you start to realise the more you do it, that actually you can walk alongside somebody, but it's their journey, it's their thing they're doing. I think I found myself more as a coach when I started to look at different things. A guy called Tim Galway, inner coaching, this whole idea of how you might help somebody understand, raise their awareness of what they do and how they go about it. And that really didn't come straight away. To start with, you nearly want people to do what you did and what you've been told.
Yeah.
And then after time, you start to understand there's so many different ways to play our game.
It's a blend and a balance, though, isn't it, coaching? Because you'll find some individuals who almost demand attention, and you need to speak to them virtually every day about, it might not be technical, but it might just be an arm around the shoulder or a kick up the backside or whatever. And yet there are others who just want to push you to one side, and they'll come to you when they want you. So how long does it take for you to assess that sort of situation and assess the individuals, and to how you approach, not on a team ethic, but from an individual basis?
I think generally I have certain things. So for me as a coach, now I would say to most people, if you want a mantra, watch a lot and say a little. It's probably pretty much where you go to. You don't have to be in a rush to say something, because the players probably been doing like that for ages. Basics are your friend. Really, the game is, most things in life are about basics, often at higher levels, sport-wise, done at pace. They're done really fast. But it's the same things, things like balance, basic alignments, rhythm, which is sort of like a forgotten part of coaching. Someone's in rhythm because they're smiling, they're happy, they're relaxed. So if anybody's not in rhythm or looks uptight, I'm going nowhere near them to start with. I'm just going to sort of trying to help, can we get it? So you start to enjoy it, you relax and play. Then you'll see the real player, and then somewhere in that, you're going to wander down, you're going to say, well, how are you going? Do you want me to? So we have different players. We had some really interesting players recently at Notts, and currently Ben Duckett, who's playing for England.
Yeah.
And I think Ben would openly admit he was an interesting player when he first came, because like a lot of the really good players, they don't want you to interfere with them, because they don't want you to take something away, and quite rightly so. So I think you understand as a coach, you could scare them off in a heartbeat.
So you have to develop a trust, basically, don't you?
Yeah, and then tread really carefully.
And without being too dictatorial.
Yeah,
basically.
I don't think. I mean, you never want to be dictatorial.
No.
But how people you come across to somebody is the important thing. You want to help, and the biggest challenge for anybody who's coaching is often those coaches are carers. They want to help, they want to improve, but coaching also makes you. Your first point to see is you see the fault. And you don't really want to see the fault straight away. You want to see the good bit stuff. And that's what to sort of mirror, to sort of shape what you're seeing. So I think you watch, and as you watch a player over a period of time, you start to understand them better. And the fact that you don't interfere, you don't go there, the player gains trust that you're with them, and then they come to you and they ask what you think. And as I say, I mean, the longer you coach, or the longer I've been in the game, in some ways the simpler it gets, really. Players love to get confused, and coaches love to confuse them if we're not careful. The job is really to try and keep bringing it back to very simple things. The people within the pro game, they're talented.
So you refine your approach over time and through experience, basically.
Yeah, you say less. I don't think you do less. I mean, there's certain things that go with coaching. I would say to a young coach, you've got to look for work. Yeah. I get frustrated now watching coaches not look for work, and in work means there's an enthusiasm to help people go and practice and stuff like that. It'd be a myth to think everybody's got these different stages they go, but to become a highly skilled professional player, you're going to have to hit a lot of balls at some point in your career as a batter. You're going to have to do a volume. Repeatability comes through volume. Doesn't come through a technical change. So at some point you'll do that. Now you might also come across a player who's 30 odd, who's done the volume. And now he doesn't need the volume. He needs to look after himself slightly differently. But everybody goes through these different stages. My worry is when a player who hasn't done the volume yet starts to try and copy the guy who has. And he thinks he can suddenly be repeated by just relaxing and going and playing. It's the line from a coach that frustrates me. Just go and play. Just go and relax. Well, for a 21-year-old who doesn't know how to do that, it's impossible. You need some technique to go out there. You know, when you go in front of a lot of people and you really want to do something well, that's hard. And you learn that over time. You often learn it off other players. You know, you play with good players. And I think now we hear a lot about the franchise system, this great system in some ways for people to be able to get information off other great players who've been out there and done it. And you know, because they're still doing it, because it works for them doesn't mean it'll work for you, but it'll give you a steer on where to go.
Yes, there's a great transference of knowledge, isn't there now? Greater within the game than there ever was. The game was probably quite insular. You played for your county, and then maybe if you were good enough, you played for your country, but you didn't get that interaction with the best players around the world, which, as you've just pointed out, you do now in the franchise system.
And that information's good and bad. Do you know what I mean? Because you can watch a masterclass and suddenly think, well, I'll go and do it. And I'll take a bit of that. And you forget, actually, you can't be... the goal isn't to become Josh Butler or whoever. It's to become the best version of you. And you've got to find your system. Now, everywhere you go now, there's information about everything. And it sometimes stops you paying attention to what you're doing and how you apply what you've got, if you know what I mean.
Let's just go back a little bit, because Lancashire supporters and members and the Lancashire TV viewers will remember with great fondness the 2011 season when Lancashire won the county championship and you were here as head coach. And you'd already won the county championship with Sussex some years earlier. You became the first coach to win with two different counties. Did you have a set method as to how you were going to attain that, or how you planned to try and win the county championship?
I had the experience of going through developing a team to the point, it was actually not dissimilar here, because new captain in Glenn Chappell, there'd been 3 or 4 senior lads had moved on. At the time, Dominic Cork had moved on, the lads had gone, so there was a freshness about it, some young players coming through. And it was a chance really to start to build something. It was exciting. Everything felt exciting. And we had a good core of senior lads. People like Chile, Luke Sutton, Gary Keady. So it was a good core of people and youngsters coming through. You know, you had that sort of different tiers, Croft, Tommy Smith, Simon Kerrigan.
And Glenn as captain, who would always lead by example. You couldn't get a more wholehearted cricketer than Glenn Chappell.
An absolute quality player, which, I mean, you can't win the championship without good players. You can't do it. And you've got to keep the good players on the park. So I always start from the same point, really. The goal really is, as a coach, and the whole setup, help people get better and do things that help them stay on the park. Because you only win if your best players stay there. It's a marathon, county championship. So the first thing we wanted to do was speak about winning it. Because there was a bit of debate going at the start with, you know, if you spoke about it, you're never going to get it. Well, I think in some ways Glenn was passionate. He'd come all the way through. And we didn't speak about it probably till 10, 11. Then I think verbally saying, listen, the goal is to win the county championship. We want to win it. You need a bit of luck. Yeah. But you've got to get yourself into that top 3. So we've gone, I think my first year we were 4th, and then I think we were 4th or 3rd, but in a stronger 4th or 3rd rather than holding on. And then you need to get out of the blocks quick, and we did. We got out of the blocks really quick, played well. It was at Liverpool, which was different in its own right. Good cricket pitch.
Played a majority of games at Liverpool because this place was being redeveloped.
And I look back at that time, really, it was a really exciting time at the club, full stop. Well, you were there. The whole thing, there was a lot of what I would say really healthy pushing. You know, if we didn't do well, even at a young side, you know, you'd call me in. What you doing? Come on, get them sorted. But I liked it. We wanted to win. We wanted to move on. And so there was an expectation on players to push.
Ambition and enthusiasm goes hand in hand with you. That's what you are. You'd been coach at Sussex, you'd been coach with England, you came to Lancashire, and you were still ambitious because you went back to England and then you went to Notts.
Yeah.
So this has driven you all the way through, okay, so your playing career and also through your coaching career. Where does that stem from, that ambition, that search for the next step, if you like?
I don't know. I mean, I think generally I enjoy trying to watch people move on. And that's something, there's an ego involved in your own right. You're not trying to prove, you start trying to prove a point. I started coaching, you're trying to prove that you can do it. I think as you go through it, you start to try and help other people prove their point. And I think that becomes much more fun. It's much more attractive to a player. And you start to understand, actually, there's something great when you watch somebody start to really achieve their potential, which always sounds a bit cliched, but you see so much in players. I always say, if you want to become a coach, you have to see what could be rather than what is. So we see it in our kids all the time. Every time you look at your kids, you see them at 5, you imagine them being something unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I think if you can't look at any player that's on your staff and think, wow. I mean, I always remember seeing Steve Parry when I first saw Steve, and he had this natural ability to change pace. And all I could see was one-day bowler. Oof, mate. Great lad. Great enthusiasm. Could bat a bit. And I might have even seen that before he saw it. My job is then that he can see what I can see. And then we're not working anymore. Now we're just going there to try and get you to this point where you go and smash the world. And you can go for it. And he did.
He did. He got himself to England one-day bowler.
Absolutely. And was a really quality performer and had an enthusiasm to get better. And that, to me, Tom Smith, Crofty, all that sort of crew, and then suddenly they find something else. So you might not have you've seen this, but actually it's moved off a bit. It's now here. So Crofty as a captain was one, in some ways, when he first came in his leadership, he stood in for Chappie on one game, and he said the line, I think he said the line to the lads before the start. It was only a practice game at Kent or something like that. And he said, listen, lads, I don't expect much. Just treat me as though I'm Glenn Chappell on the day and give me that respect. We'll go fine. And I went, whoa, what a good line.
Good line, yeah.
And the day went really smooth after that because he said, listen, I'm captain of Lancashire County Cricket Club. Yeah. And that's what I expect. But I didn't expect him to say that line. And as soon as he did, I thought, oh, yeah, there's a bit more in there than people maybe think.
What about Jimmy Anderson? Did you have much contact with him when you were at Lancashire? Obviously, he's played for England for the best part of 20 years now, so he's been out of the county setup per se, but Jimmy is one of those players who's developed and continuing to develop and still going strong. I mean, he is a phenomenal individual.
Yeah, so Jimmy, I came across Jimmy lots of different times. Academy first, Academy director. Jimmy was on that crew, was on his way back to try and get back into England, gone through a remodel and whatever, and in some ways had burst on the scene, didn't he? This lad from Burnley.
With pace, and who could swing it as well.
Great bowler. And then I'd had to go through this thing. And I think in some ways, Jimmy would probably say it was lost in what was, I think the coaches were lost at that time. The bowling coaches, there that many theories going on about front on side on whatever.
And his head there was this thing about him, his head dipping, wasn't there? And
well, Jimmy's always had these head turns a bit, comes back. But Jimmy's rotation on the way he moves, everything sort of twists and turns and unlocks. And it's beautiful, flows, great to watch. And I think really Mike Watkinson at the time, along with Kevin Shiner, being a young coach coming through, with Jimmy himself, went back to his old action. And then so I first came to Jimmy in that sort of academy. Then as England coach, he came back in and played. He was on the tour to New Zealand and everything in the net was looking great. And we played him, I think his first test match back, him and Stewart played together for the first time, and it looked great.
Is that New Zealand?
New Zealand, I think.
Wellington.
Wellington. And I think Jimmy got 5 for him one innings, and Brody maybe got 5 for him the other, but it looked right. I think Swan had come in, and it felt like there was a bowling attack really forming. So I went through with Jimmy quite a bit on that, and obviously when I came here, Jimmy was here, so I coached Jimmy here, and then second time in England, Jimmy was there. So I've got good history with Jimmy. I love him because, you know, him and Brody get compared together quite a bit. They're complete opposites in some ways, which makes them work. Jimmy's a craftsman, so he works the craft of bowling, And Brodie comes from Brodie's a tactician. Brodie comes from the tactical end. They both are technical bowlers, don't get me wrong, and both can work themselves out. But for me, Jimmy, it's about being able to swing it, wobble it, send it down a line that's this thin, whatever he wants to do. Brodie works the other way around for me. I need to be able to do this to get you out, so I'm going to work this out. And I'll set the field like this, and I'll go from the tactical end. One's a swing bowler, right up on the back, Brodie's up and over the top. So you can see why they complement, and as personalities, they're different. They're different, you know, and that opposites often do attract in a good way.
Yeah, best part of 1,300 Test wickets tells the story, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Wonderful. So you've seen players over a period of time. You've been at Notts very successfully now for a number of years. You've mentioned Ben Duckett. Again, Lancashire viewers will be interested in the fact that you've I can't say you've redefined, but we're talking about Hasim Hamid now, and he went through a really tough time here at Lancashire, and actually probably struggled to get back into the game, but Nottinghamshire gave him I suppose it was a lifeline, and he's come back and started playing some good cricket now, and you will have been a fundamental part in that resurrection, won't you?
Yeah, I mean, I knew Hass as a youngster here actually, because when I remember I was coach here, Hass would have been 15 or something like that, and I remember speaking to Steve Titchard about him. He was a really good young player, and obviously started well, got a bit lost, happens for all young players at different times, so I don't think anybody takes any blame for that, it just happens. When he came out, I sat down and talked to him here actually, I think we might have been playing, and he knew he was leaving, and just sat and talked to him, and it felt like straight away for me we had the club that he wanted to go to, because basically the way, if you ask me how I'd want to run a setup, it's a bit like, call it what you like, skill factory, we're going to try and help you get better, because really the way our game works, if you can bat, you can bat, if you can bowl, you can bowl. It's this funny mix, isn't it?
Yeah.
Cricket. And Hass is another craftsman. He's a Jimmy type player. So he wants to bat, he wants to talk the game, he wants to understand the game, he wants to hit balls. So he needs to be in a setup that'll let him do that. And I thought we've got that sort of setup, so if you want to go for it, come in. Immediately came in, it fitted. He had to make some adjustments, because I think when he very first came, I used to say the same thing. It's like you're trying to survive the channel. You know, bowlers bowl the channel.
Yeah.
It's like you're trying to survive.
Yeah.
Well, it's no fun. There's no game in that. You know, you've got to perform, and you've got to find a way of how you're going to perform. So you see a lot of batters now, they sort of want to get in line, and they end up batting even further and further outside of some, so they don't get out. And you're thinking, well, cricket we want width. We want width. Stay this side of the ball. If it bowls wide, belt the damn thing.
Don't defend it on 6 stumps.
Absolutely. The old style, you know, you defend your stumps outside, you leave or you attack.
You're a bowler's dream if you're going to do that.
Back to a really simple basic in the game. So I think Hass was going to buy into that, because he wanted to score fast. We reconnected a bit like maybe other players have. You go back to when you were 18, 19. What did you do? How did you play? What drew you to the game? And it wasn't to not get out. It was to score runs and play. And he started to play better. And I think each time Hass has ever had any trouble, like a lot of players, it's because you're looking for a bit more. And sometimes you don't need to look. You know, apply what you've got. Don't look for something else. You get more because you get more experience. But this striving for the extra is probably, I think, one of the biggest mistakes we see in modern players, because they forget, actually, I've got enough already. I'm just not using it. There's always something else I want. Well, actually, you know, normally you've got enough. You have enough. And I'd say that in a lot of different walks of life now. You know, if you focus on giving the best version of you on that day with what you've got, then I would say you're a games player. We have a lot of people, I would say, are becoming technical players. And it's more about how, did I look right? Did it look, rather than playing the game? And it's you against somebody. It's a boxing match, bat against bowler. You know, pro sport especially is not just how well you play, it's how badly you make somebody else play. And that's part about how your presence is as a player and how you present on the day.
Exactly. The basic currencies in the game are if you're a batter, you score runs, and if you're a bowler, you take wickets.
Absolutely.
And that's it.
Absolutely.
You know, Peter, you've coached 3 counties very successfully. You've had 2 stints with England. You're pretty well qualified, I would imagine, to take an overview of the game and look at the way the game is in England. Are you happy with the structure of the game? Happy with 14 matches in the first division? Happy with 4 different competitions? Notwithstanding the fact that it is virtually an insolvable mystery, but are we in a position in England to produce the best cricketers and the best cricket?
Well, we're producing cricketers. We always have produced cricketers. And they haven't been always... County cricket produces a player and it gets rounded and finished off by England. This is historically how it's worked. There's always been a gap.
Mm-hmm.
The gap gets a bit less now, I think, because of exposure, certainly in white ball cricket. The way I look at it at the moment is I still think some ways we're not really tackling the problem properly. I mean, at the moment, a top flight batter who plays all formats, you've just got to accept he does probably 8.5 months of white ball cricket or 9 months of white and a couple of months of 2.5 months of red ball. So there's a reason why our white ball goes like this and our red ball stuttered for a while. I think what Brendan has brought in with Ben is something that merges the two closer together, which has worked. And we've got some really good batters at the moment. We've got some really good players. And the exciting bit has been this emergence of some young seamers, Gus Atkins and people like that coming through. The structure for me, I started like you would have started when we had 4 comps. Benson Edges, John Player League. And of those comps, they didn't all match the global game. The global game being Test match, 50 over in 2020.
And we had 40, 55, 60,
yeah,
and 3-day red ball.
So my worry is we're back to 4 comps, and that means there's a middle part of the season where you're playing red ball 2020, just before the 100 comes on. That bit of the season doesn't work properly at all, because realistically, I think there's a chance you're going to break things. A lot of injuries get in there. The quality has to sacrifice a bit, and you're trying to make sure you get enough cricket to make it realistic for a member to come and watch. You not have these big gaps.
Mm-hmm.
But really, to me, there should be 3 comps. The 100 I thought was great this year, great to watch, but I still think it should be T20 franchise. Not franchise, T20 our main comp, and if it's a futures league or something, should probably sit behind it, that feeds into it.
Yeah.
How you get to that point, there's some brave decisions to make. Will the 100 survive the long course? I don't know. You're going to have to wait and see. What we saw is 40 over cricket was great, but didn't survive because the World Cup was 50. 60 didn't survive, 55 didn't survive. So will 100 ball survive? I don't know. But this year's tournament, the best thing about it this year for me was the games were close, the cricket was good, and I like the way it's produced in some ways. I get the whole idea is we've got to move ourselves. The question is, should it be 120 balls or 100 balls? That's a debate.
It's probably academic in the grand scheme of things, to be honest. But I think I tend to agree with you that 20 overs, because it's universal and will be universal, is perhaps the way to go. What about red ball cricket, though? And there's a predominance of white ball cricket around the globe. Franchise cricket, whether we like it or not, is here to stay, and it is probably the way the game's going to go. But red ball, for me, as a traditionalist, if you like, has to stay and has to be played. And in England, we marginalise it. We're playing in April. We're sitting down here now. The ground's flooded in September. We've had some good weather in September.
Yeah, we have.
But for me, there has to be a solution, and to play more red ball cricket, even though it's probably not the most. It's certainly not the most popular form of the game. Would you agree with that or not?
I don't think you play more. I think 14 games is the right amount. I don't think you play more than that. You just got to accept that 4 comps doesn't fit into our summer without compromise somewhere. So the question is, where's the compromise? I love 4-day cricket because I think it really helps a player understand the game, and I think that protects the player in the short form, because they can repair themselves. certainly batters, maybe less than bowlers in some ways, but for the batter who's gone through a bit of a journey in 4-day cricket, often I think if he plays white ball cricket and he's playing the short form after that, if he loses form, he knows where to go back to. He knows how to repair and innovate the game a bit.
Mm-hmm.
The best part of the Red Bull season at the moment for a coach and the lads, I think, is the first 6 games. We play this block, and then it's a really messy bit, and obviously play at the end. We marginalise it, there's no doubt about that, because white ball's where all the money is.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way to make the Red Bull season feel more continuity is, I think, you'd have to lose a comp from somewhere and either put one behind the other, so the 100 and the T20 match or whatever. But I think that's the only way to make it fit. If you're going to stay with 4, you're going to get a slightly compromised Red Bull competition. I've got a lot of Red Bull history in me, and I love the fact that it tests players' character and will out in a different way than T20 cricket.
You have got a lot of red ball history and white ball, and you've progressed, not progressed, but you've also taken charge of a franchise in Pakistan. Do you see that as the future for Peter Moores, moving into white ball cricket?
No, not particularly.
You're very happy doing what you're
that came
doing?
off. I really enjoyed it. It was tough actually. We didn't particularly do great. I mean, I'm doing Melbourne Stars this winter, which I'm really looking forward to. I see it as an opportunity to experience something different. Commentate on, if I'm gonna, it's because I haven't done it, a lot of it. I'm interested in it. I love developing players or giving players opportunity to develop, and county cricket is a great format for that, because you get everybody from your young 17, 18-year-olds all the way to your 37, 38-year-olds. And if they're all looking to move the games on, then the environment's healthy. Franchise different, but I do think there's a healthy part of that as well. I think there's got to be in there where players, you don't want it to become a circuit where people are just going from franchise to franchise, because there's sort of a weird situation now, I think, it seems to be, where a player can sort of play 2/3 of a tournament, and then another one starts, and he goes and starts the next one, and doesn't get to what is the crunch of the tournament, which is the semis and finals. And that's something I think in England you'd love to protect. That those tournaments, any tournament you play, you get the best players who start and finish, and it's packaged up, because that for the supporter makes it a bit easier to follow and more real. You start a tournament, you finish a tournament, and the same player that started it can finish it. How that's going to fit in the world game over the next 5-10 years, I'm not sure. You're going to have to lose some tournaments somewhere, aren't you? There's so many of them. Yeah. But where my coaching goes, I've never been a planner, if I'm honest. I just sort of I know my strength is my weakness, so I get immersed in where I am, totally. And that's a real strength when you're in that setup. It's not great when you haven't phoned your missus or done something and she said, "What you been doing?" I said, "I got lost. Sorry, I got lost in this and I forgot." But that to me works for me, and sometimes it means I don't look too far ahead. I think sport's a bit like that anyway. It tends to doesn't look after you. If you think you can plan your way through it, it doesn't happen. You know, there's got to be a healthy respect for whatever you're doing, that if you're not doing a good job where you are, it changes in a heartbeat.
Peter, I think that's a pretty good philosophy, and you've had a really successful coaching career in the English county game and internationally, and there's more to come, I'm sure. Thank you very much for talking to us today.
Thanks, Walt.